Audio or video footage used in this video is owned entirely by the copyright holders. Horrific FX makes no claim of ownership and is simply using the footage for purposes of education, commentary, and criticism under fair use. Hello and welcome to a brand new Top 13 countdown from Horrific FX. On this video, we will be counting down the top 13 horror movies from the 1980s. Of course, any film that was released in the 1980s is able to be in this countdown, including sequels. There is actually one sequel in this countdown. And before we get on with the countdown, I should mention there are spoilers. So if any of you have not seen any of these films and do not want to be spoiled about what happens, please skip forward when you get to that particular film. Otherwise, let's get on with the countdown. Number 13, Fright Night. Now, this fun little film, if for any of you who have not seen it, is basically revolves around this teenager who finds out that his brand new next door neighbor is in fact a vampire. And he tracks down a local horror TV host to help him kill the vampire before he can take over the soul of his girlfriend. And this was a very, very fun film. Chris Sarandon played a terrific vampire in the film, and it was just a very, very fun film. Not a horror film that can be taken too seriously, but like I said, just a fun film, and some nice performances in the film. Even the main character's friend, who was played by the kid who played Hoax in 1989, I believe, Robert Englund film 976 Evil. So a very fun film. Definitely recommend checking it out. There is a remake that came out a few years back. Not a huge fan of the remake, but it's not terrible. But definitely recommend checking out the original Fright Night. Number 12, Poltergeist. Now, this is a film I put on this list because of its loyal fan base and following. I understand and respect its place in horror, although I will be perfectly honest and say I am not a huge fan of this film. It takes a lot to win me over for a horror movie that's not rated R. And when I saw this film as a kid, it didn't really do it for me. As I got older and rewatched it, I understood where it stands in horror. And again, I respect it and admire it for that. But I'm not a huge fan of it. But I do have to admonish its place in horror, and especially in 80s horror. It did have some great performances and some great effects. So I have to put it on here just for that alone. Number 11, Aliens. Now, this is another film, again, I've mentioned in previous videos. I've never been a huge fan of the Alien films. I'm just not huge into that many science fiction horror films, and I've never been a fan of horror films taking place in space. But like with Poltergeist, I do understand its place in horror history, and in this film especially, introducing the Queen Alien and the legendary fight at the end of the movie with Ripley when she's in that machine contraption, and again, just a nice follow-up to the original. Number 10, Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer. Now, this was a very, very good film, highly entertaining. Um, One of the things that was really nice about it was the raw, gritty feel to the film. A wonderful performance by Michael Rooker, who now is known for his roles in The Walking Dead and the Guardians of the Galaxy films. But before all that, was widely known for his role of Henry in this film. The great characters of Henry and Otis, and basically revolves around this killer who, once he's out, starts commits another crime spree. But just a very nice, in-depth film, and one of the first films that I can think of that really painted the killer as the main character. He wasn't just someone that was hiding behind bushes or hiding in the street, lurking in. He was front and center in this film, and that was one of the things that was very, very entertaining about this film. Number 9, A Nightmare on Elm Street. Obviously, the pinnacle of Wes Craven and his plethora of terrific films that he made for us horror fans. What can be said about Nightmare on Elm Street that anyone does not know the classic tale of Freddy Krueger and his first film. And people think of Freddy Krueger, they think of the wisecracks and jokes, but those of you who haven't seen the film that much, Freddy Krueger was a very dark character in this film. He wasn't making the wisecracks and puns that he would in the later sequels, and that's kind of forgotten. Kind of like most people forgetting that Jason wasn't the killer in the original Friday the 13th. Freddy Krueger was a very much darker character in this film. Great visual effects at the time, very memorable scenes from Johnny Depp's death in his character's death to the first real death you see in the film with Tina's death, to the bathtub scene, and so much more. Just a terrific, terrific movie, and great performances by Johnny Depp, Heather Langenkamp, and of course the iconic classic Robert Englund. Number 8, An American Werewolf in London. Now, this to me is the ultimate werewolf movie. Um, a very well put together film. Has an extreme amount of comedy and an extreme amount of horror and gore. Great special effects makeup on not only the werewolf. That Rick Baker did a terrific job with the werewolf makeup, and not only that, but the victims and his buddy who returns from the undead to guide him through his werewolf life now. Great makeup on him as you slowly, in each scene, you see him deteriorating more and more and becoming more dead than in the previous time you saw him. And going back to the werewolf nature of it, just the transformation scene. I think it was the very first time in a werewolf movie you see the wolf transform. And great effects that were done. Great work. Number 7, Return of the Living Dead. Now, this is a classic zombie movie. Now, it's not up there with Dawn of the Dead or Night of the Living Dead, but Return of the Living Dead to me is the best zombie film of the 1980s. Day of the Dead was a good film, which came out the same year as this, but to me, I enjoyed this much more. Dawn of the Dead actually, or Day of the Dead, excuse me, just missed making it on this countdown. But Return of the Living Dead is a great zombie film, and really seemed to capture that 1980s feel. When you think of the 1980s, you think of so many different things, and it's all in this film. And it basically revolves around this United States military tanker that is accidentally discharged, and the gas leaks out and near a cemetery, and all these zombies come back. And the fun thing about this film is it didn't follow the other Living Dead films, even though this was its own film. It didn't follow the idea of hit them in the head, they're dead. They were unkillable in this. And um, this is the first zombie film where you see them wanting brains. Again, nowadays you think of zombies, you think of them going after brains. This is the movie where that came from. And so many great characters that you think of, from all the teenagers in the film to Linnea Quigley's character, down to the iconic Tarman zombie, and so forth. And just a great zombie film to watch, and definitely nostalgic for the 80s, especially with a great 80s soundtrack too. Number 6, ReAnimator. Now, this is a very entertaining film. Anyone who has not seen it, I highly recommend checking out this film. It revolves around a student in a science program, medical program, who is discovering this serum that can bring the dead back to life. And he experiments on a friend's cat and so forth. And eventually, the head of the science program, I believe it was, at the school, finds the serum and wants to use it for his own financial gain. And memorable moments from the fact that the he gets his head chopped off, and he uses the serum to be brought back, and he's just a head with a severed body, down to the classic scene that everyone always seems to love to talk about, with the female lead strapped down nude onto a table, and the evil protagonist having his severed head placed somewhere rather inappropriately, but a classic scene that everyone seems to talk about to this very day. A very fun film, and for as dark and gruesome as it is, has some very fine comedy added to it. So definitely recommend checking out ReAnimator. Number 5, The Evil Dead. Now, some people might put Evil Dead 2 ahead of Evil Dead. Um, and Evil Dead 2 was one that just missed out on this list. Um, so I was kind of debating, should I go Evil Dead 2? Should I go Evil Dead? I didn't necessarily want to put them both on there. I wanted to, but I felt if I had to pick one, I've always been more partial to the Evil Dead. Evil Dead 2 has some great moments and is a great film. But I personally prefer the original one, which is a lot more darker and horror in tone and not as much comedy. And even though Evil Dead 2 is where we were introduced to the Ash that we all know and love, um, the Evil Dead, the first one, just I personally just like and love so much. It's always one of my favorite things to do in September when it starts getting closer to the haunt season, Halloween season, to pop in my DVD of Evil Dead and watch the iconic radio spots and trailers, and a fun film. Of course, some famous scenes. Of course, the tree scene in the forest. That's one that's unforgettable. Um, and some great work by Bruce Campbell, and Sam Raimi's directorial style, again, is just so unmatched by anyone. Number 4, The Lost Boys. Now, this film is right there with Dracula as my all-time favorite vampire film. Again, just similar to Return of the Living Dead, has a strong 80s feel to it. Basically revolves around this family. They move to a new town, and the kid in the family starts hanging out with these guys who work at these kids who work at the local comic book store, and soon discover their town is inhabited by vampires. And the chase pursues between the vampires and the living. Great performances by Corey Haim, Corey Feldman, of course, Just a classic story. Uh, just celebrated an anniversary last year. The film was released in 1987, and a great film. The vampire is so iconic. Again, you mentioned the name Lost Boys. You can't help but think of the four of them and their outfits and on their motorcycles, and of course the famous scene, famous image that is on the video right now that you're seeing. So anyone who has not seen this film, definitely recommend checking it out. A very good vampire film. Number 3, The Fly. Now, I'm not a huge fan of remakes, but actually this and the next film on the list are remakes. And I remember watching this being blown away because, like I said, I'm not a huge fan of remakes, and especially the fact that it's remaking a Vincent Price film. And to this very day, Vincent Price remains my all-time favorite actor. But The Fly was just a phenomenal film. Groundbreaking special effects makeup. Um, a great performance by Jeff Goldblum and Gina Davis also. Some memorable, iconic imagery that you just don't see on film today, especially since now everything's so CGI. The fact that they'd used practical effects and practical makeup revolves around Seth Brundle, who discovers this teleporting machine and accidentally goes in with a fly and starts mutating into a fly. And just some of the scenes from his transformation to body parts falling off to his teeth coming out to um, his vomiting and so forth. Just great moments, and culminating in the climax with the ending of the film. And great visuals. Also, attacking the guy trying to stop him by vomiting that acid, I guess per se, onto his onto his hands and and feet, and melting away. Just such great stuff to watch. Number 2, The Thing. Now, a wonderful masterpiece by John Carpenter. You ask anyone about the greatest John Carpenter films, it's going to come down to Halloween and The Thing. And of course, Halloween was released in 1978, so it was not able to be on this countdown. But The Thing is a true masterpiece. And like I mentioned before, how I was a fan of the original Vincent Price, The Fly, I was a huge fan of the original The Thing from Another World, which actually is paid tribute to in Halloween, as that is shown on the television set in the original Halloween. And I still remember watching so many documentaries about this film, and one of the great things everyone kept talking about, especially John Carpenter, was how he talked to Stephen King, and it was said you keep the monster hidden. Well, John Carpenter said, screw that, I'm putting him out in the open. And it worked so masterfully, and unbelievable special effects in that film, from all the different forms that the Thing takes to just the visuals, that spider, the stomach chomping on the guy's hand, the head monster coming up. Just great, wonderful visuals, and the setting of it being in that snowy landscape just worked so wonderful, and great performances by the cast. And of course, Kurt Russell knocking it out of the park once again. Number 1, The Shining. What can not be said about this film? A true masterpiece. Now, I know diehard Stephen King fans will admonish that he was not a huge fan of it, especially since it did not stick that close to the novel. But still a wonderful masterpiece of horror cinema. You talk to any movie reviewer to name their top 10 horror movies, this is undoubtedly in the top 10, if not the top 5 of everyone's list. Jack Nicholson's performance um, as Jack Torrance is unbelievable. And anyone who has not seen this film, as much as I appreciate you listening to my videos, drop it now, stop it now, and go check out The Shining. It does have a made-for-TV remake, um, and there is a planned sequel, Doctor Sleep, which was a Stephen King novel not too long ago, which is in production. But the original Shining, just the claustrophobic of this giant hotel and the ghost and the scenery of the snowy Overlook Hotel and everything about the film, from Danny to the twins, Danny riding his little bicycle and hitting the carpet and then the floor and then the carpet again and then the floor. Just the audio of that, just so great, and the blood coming out on the elevator. So many aspects about this film that you can just talk and talk and talk about. But I definitely would put The Shining as the greatest horror film of the 1980s. All right, and that will wrap up this video on the 13 greatest horror films of the 1980s. Um, I'm sure my list differs from yours. That's what makes everyone's taste so great. Everyone has their own likes and dislikes. I hope you enjoyed this video and invite you to check out all the other videos on my channel here. And if you like it, please hit that like button and feel free to subscribe. Thank you very much and have a pleasant day.